Ibrahim, during your address to the MEPs, you said that prison is a whole new world where you have to learn a new culture, a new way of living, and you said where every human right accorded to you is violated. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So one of the main reasons that really affected me in prison, of course, it's an honor to be here and for Lynn to bring me here to speak in front of the MEPs, because for me in prison that was such a absolutely reviving to hope when the resolution took place and they voted for me to be released unconditionally from Egyptian prisons. So I came back and to say thank you and to tell them about the Egyptian conditions in prison. But one of the main things that really shocked me in prison was how a doctor and a student or a simple farmer could all be, really equal once they put that prison suit on and just live the prison life, because you have to be, you're synced into this new life where you have to survive. Some people take the bad route of it, some people take the good route of it, some people stay the same of how they were. And, it's a really shocking way of living to me as a 17-year-old to go into that and to try to understand it as a teenager. And I have to go by the system and obey the prison system, not the prison law. That's something totally different, because prisoners have a different system within themselves that they have to go by.
So I know you've talked about your time in prison now several times, but what was it like initially when you were only 17, you were a minor when you were arrested, when you were taken to Cairo and put into prison?
So of course, with coming from a democratic background in Ireland and we practice democracy, I never thought that I would actually be in prison for such a long time. And I thought it would, I did nothing wrong and that the law literally, it goes by the people and says whatever the people want in a revolution that they will get if it's for the call of democracy. So I went down for that reason initially in Egypt. I took part in the protest in Egypt for that cause, but I was there for a family holiday because I have extended family in Egypt. So when the protests got taken place and my friends were killed, that's when I started to protest against the killing of people and the killing of innocent. And I was imprisoned as a 17-year-old, and I thought I'd be out in no time because I'm a minor, and I had my sisters who were imprisoned with me, three, Sumaya, Fatima and Umayma, who were also in prison. So I thought, okay, maybe it's a couple of days till they figure out the system where we have nothing against us because it's just protests, it's a coup, it's a revolution, whatever you want to call it, but the system is down. So we're in there for a part-time, but for me to be there for 4 years was really, really shocking for me.
And at what stage did you realise that your incarceration could be for a long time?
So we were presented at a judge after about 6 months. Was the first time we were presented in front of a judge. But the first trial straight away, he brought it back to the courts and he said that he doesn't want to hold the case anymore. And we were going back to the legal system, and we stayed another 6 months in there. And that's when I started to say, okay, maybe I'm staying here for a longer time. I never, of course, lost hope because there was a lot of the support I was getting from Ireland, from Lynn, from Daramakin and Amnesty and Reprieve and the Irish people. But as a prisoner, you always have to have something to have your hope based on. Sometimes that breaks, but sometimes that, can bring you up and it can bring you back down. So it depends on the day, it depends on the life you're living, it depends on the prison you go to, because I've been to 9 different prisons, so it differentiates from each prison.
And what would have been your living conditions most of the time when you were in prison?
So most of the time I visited, I visited for a huge part of my time was visiting wire, where it was wire and then 1 meter space and then wire between me and my family. And it was 5-minute visit, and that for me was very bad because lack of communication is a break to hope with the family, because you make them feel better and they make you feel better, and then that's how you survive your week or 2 weeks of prison until your next visit. That's why a lot of people who don't visit in prison really tend to lose it mentally or tend to get very ill, that they don't have any family visiting them. So we tried to in the cell to try always make them feel that they're home, get them stuff that they need. But most of my prison time, it was 35 centimeters you sleep on. It was a packed cell, 30 to 35 people. I was isolated in a different prison with a lot of people, but politically by myself in Wadi Nat room 440. I was isolated there for a very long time. I woke up to this sound of screaming every day at 7 a.m. And so that was my alarm basically. 7 a.m. was the noise of people screaming from beating, and the bars echoing off their back is what I can hear every day till now. Of course, there was no food, there was no drinking water for a very long time as well. We were forced to drink from the toilet in Egypt, and I wrote about that in letters and how bad it was and the terrible conditions it was, because I always believed that I was brought there for a reason, to see these conditions, to bring it back to people and tell them that there is these conditions happening, that I am one of the people who was living a normal life in Ireland, and I went to these conditions by whatever you want to call it, but I ended up in a cell, and I took part in a peaceful protest, ended up in a cell, and I had to bring these back to the values, to tell them that we are taking a lot of things for granted.
Were you physically tortured or physically beaten?
Yes, I was. So the norm in prison is to be slapped, kicked and beaten by bars. So usually if you meet a prisoner in Egypt, you don't ask them, did that happen to you? But I was beaten with a metal chain. I was laid on the ground naked on the hot surface in the desert, and it was a very hot summer as well in Wadi Natrum 440. I was stood on by guards. I was tied to bars as if I was crucified. So there was a lot of that was going on. But there was people who were tortured, electrocuted in private parts. There were people who had chunks of meat taken off by them by scissors or knives. So there is a lot of very, very disturbing images till this day that I've seen.
And many times over the years, Ibrahim, it seemed like maybe you might be released. There were those mass trials, there were dates set, and then they would be cancelled. Did you give up hope at any stage, or because you went on hunger strike as well at times during the middle of this, or did you think you would be released at the end of the day?
So I think when I spoke a lot about how hunger strikes, and for one of the times I went on a hunger strike to get my cell painted, and some people made fun of that, but it's actually just, I was very sad that people made fun of it, not because of me, but it just shows that people don't yet understand the world of how someone could be so desperate to make their way of living better. And people who walk miles for water, we think that they don't do that, but they actually do that. That's how desperate people are when they're in need of something in a prison. So I was in need of a change. I was in need to see something happening. It was also a test for my first hunger strike. So I went on several hunger strikes. My last one was when my mother got got cancer, and I had to just be released. I was like, okay, there's no other condition where I'm gonna do a hunger strike other than now to be released. Of course, there was the Irish Parliament delegation that came to visit me in Egypt, so it was all the right time to do a hunger strike at that time. There is, of course, times where you lose hope, but you are human, your hope is going to break. But if you don't have the support and, the life I had behind me, my family, my sisters who were also supporting me, like I said, Lynn, Reprieve, Amnesty, the Irish people, some of the Irish government, a lot of them who were really helping me. Of course, that as well just gives you the push of hope that every time it goes down. After 4 years, a lot of people were backing down that it's taken too long. You're not going to really get released. And I think that's when I actually got released, and it was just beautiful for everyone, for me and for everyone who supported me.
I saw a recent tweet of yours where I think you were up the Dublin mountains and you said there were no filters or anything, but it was a beautiful scene, lovely, like typical Irish on a very nice day.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It's been almost 6 months since you got back home. What has it been like readjusting to normal life back in Ireland?
So one of the things I've really, Peter Greste, I was in prison with him, he's a journalist. He wrote me a letter once, and he was talking about how he was speaking to a journalist, and a journalist said to him, how do you think Ibrahim will be when he gets back home? And Peter said, once Ibrahim gets back home, there is no normal for him. And I didn't understand that. I said, okay, I'll get back to life and life will move on. But it actually is, it's like that. There is no such thing as normal when you get back, and you can't live a normal life anymore. Whether some people think it's with media, it's not really, I'm not talking about the media perspective, I'm talking about the psychological perspective of it. It sticks with you, it just stays there, it doesn't leave. And I've got back to education, I tried to move on with my life. I'm helping with a lot of homeless people. There's also the Muslim Sisters of Era who are out on the GPO helping the homeless people every Friday. I'm always helping out with them, helping any homeless in need, school, writing a book. So there's a lot of them doing at the moment, but psychologically it just always stays there.
Every day, every night?
Every night I look back. Even, some people say of how great the day of me arriving at the airport. I tend not to watch these videos because emotionally for me, I just crack down, and I don't believe that that's the person. I look back at it, and that's a different person that went through an ordeal, other than me. It's not me that went through that ordeal. And
now during all of this, the time you were incarcerated, I'm sure you're well aware, there were things said about you in social media, that you were really a militant, you were radical. Have you been radicalized by your experiences?
Not at all. Well, if we say I've been radicalized, if you call being radicalized learning about human rights, if you call radicalized learning how we should help the people in need, if you call radicalized understanding the world better and knowing the good from the bad, then people don't understand what the term of radicalization is if they're saying it about me, because that's really the values I've learned in prison. I've learned the value of time, the value of food, the value of sleeping place, the value of freedom itself, being in control of your door. That's a lot of things that I've learned. But of course I've seen people who are radicalized to the worst, who've become people who've become terrorists and radicalized into the ideology of a terrorism. And that's why I think I'm going to be here today talking a lot about radicalization as well, how we can prevent it as European people, how the European Parliament can set a hand, because I had the European Parliament back me up and ask for my freedom. People that are there don't have anyone to ask for their freedom, so therefore the radicalization it's an empty space that needs to be filled, and the people who radicalize fill it up, and there's no one else to fill it up for them. So I think we just need to be there firstly before them. And
I'm going to talk to Lynn very shortly about this. Just finally, Ibrahim, what's now set for the future for you? Because I think you're studying business studies at UCD. You started in January. Yeah. Are you thinking of changing, or what's happening?
Well, since I started business, everyone just gives me that face, why are you doing business? But so I asked them what you want me to do, and everyone says law, law, law. So I think I'll get into human rights law. And I fell in love with this place as well, so I might come back here. Yeah, I was like, Lynn, I'm going for the next elections.
Okay, really? Would you be interested in entering politics?
Not at the time being. Not at the time being.
But maybe in the future.
Maybe in the future.
Someone who loves the European Parliament, Lynn. Lynn Boylan, Sinn Fein MEP for Dublin. Of course, you played a very critical role in drawing attention to the European Parliament of Ibrahim's case. There was that resolution. When was the resolution again?
December 2015.
December 2015. Yeah. Did it play a role in helping to secure Ibrahim's release?
I really believe it did, because we were being told a lot at the time by the Irish government to stay quiet and not to agitate, and that would put Ibrahim at risk. But when I went to visit Ibrahim in prison, the August 2015, we asked him, we said, is it helping you that people are agitating and having a campaign? And I remember Ibrahim saying, no, it's keeping me alive, because the guards are saying to me, you think you're special because you're not Egyptian, you're Irish. And so it was working. And then with the resolution, like you were saying, even the guards were saying to you, you're in the news, So one of the things we had been told by all of the human rights organisations that work in Egypt is that the Egyptians don't like to be embarrassed internationally, and that's what you have to do, is to kind of cause sort of a stir. So the resolution, I believe, was a really pivotal point at which it kind of shone the international light on the case. And then, of course, the Dáil motion that followed that, the cross-party motion, was extra pressure. So I do believe it made a difference, but also to lift his spirits in prison, that it was a nearly unanimous decision. I think there was only 11 MEPs voted against that resolution that day.
And Ibrahim's visit coincides with this conference that you're holding in the European Parliament about ongoing abuses of human rights in Egypt. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So, I knew very little about Egypt before I met Ibrahim Halawa and his sisters. And then when I went out there, and you kind of got a feel for the country, and you seen the prison conditions, not the cell, but you seen families outside, and they were shouting at us, and effectively Ibrahim's sister was translating and saying, they're asking you to bring back the message about what's happening in Egypt. And I went back twice after that and met with other human rights organisations. So I almost feel like now I have a responsibility to all of those. There's 60,000 political prisoners in Egypt at the moment. So what we're doing today is we have a doctor who's going to talk about the lack of medical access for prisoners. We have somebody from Reprieve talking about the children who are being imprisoned in Cairo, also around the minorities, so the Nubian minority who are also in prison at the moment for agitating for their rights. So we're going to look at the broad issues that are happening in Egypt under Sisi. And of course we have the presidential election, which is why we chose this month to do it, because President Sisi is going uncontested effectively in the election. So it's not even a proper democratic presidential election. All of those who are strong contenders against him have either been locked up or are put under house arrest. So I think it's really important that we continue to talk about what's happening in Egypt. And it is because, what Ibrahim is saying, there are 60,000 political prisoners. A lot of them will be radicalised because they will say, we tried democracy and it didn't work. And what else is there when you're in prison and you've got no access to justice at all? So I think it's really important that the European Parliament stands up for human rights in Egypt.
Because both the United States and European Union countries have been criticised for not coming out more critically about what's going on in Egypt. It can be a tricky thing to do diplomatically. I mean, what other steps should the EU or the European Parliament be taking, do you think?
I mean, there are obligations. So they're a trading partner, Egypt and the European Parliament. And when you are a trading partner with the EU, you have obligations, particularly around human rights, but around access to justice. So the European Parliament can issue, whether it's sanctions or whether to sort of stop some of the trade that's happening, but at least to sit down and have a really robust conversation with Egypt, because what you find is with some of the MEPs in the European Parliament, they don't want to criticise Egypt at all because they say, no, Egypt is holding back this tidal wave of Muslim extremists, so we just need to let them get on. But that's counterproductive, because what President Sisi is doing in Egypt at the moment is creating more extremists rather than holding them back. So the European Parliament has an obligation to stand up for human rights, but also if they're serious about security, President Sisi is a bigger security risk than not.
And Ibrahim, back to you. Just what is your awareness now of the people who've been held by Sisi?
Against the presidential,
or just like journalists, Lynn mentioned their young children.
There's people who are with me in prison that I'm going to speak about today. For example, Abdurrahman al-Gindi, who's a German engineer student. He's studying in the German university in Egypt. Ayman Ali bin Musa, who's a British university student, also engineer. There's Shawkan, the journalist. There's Mahmoud Abu Zaid, the journalist. There's a lot of people there who are behind bars, are not, as the propaganda, Abdel Fattah Sisi's propaganda says that everyone behind bars is a terrorist. It is not like that. I have lived with a lot of normal people, doctors, people from the presidential team. I'm still in contact with them, and if we don't do anything sooner, because last week one of the people in my case from Al Fatah Mosque, who was just sentenced to 5 years, and he's meant to be released in a few months. He died because of lack of medical attention just last week there, and I got the news at home and I started to cry, because if we don't do anything about that, everyone's just going to keep dying. Everyone's just going to be radicalized there, and then we spent a lot of millions on the people who are radicalized, or a lot of people who are going out to do bad deeds, and then we just say that we don't know where it's coming from, when we actually know where it's coming from and where it's been manufactured in Abdel Fattah Sisi's prisons.
Do you see yourself going back to Egypt anytime soon?
Not for the time being now, no.
Not until the regime changes at least, anyway?
Maybe for a good few years. Yeah, good few years.
Okay, Ibrahim Halawa, thank you so much for talking to me today, and thanks to you too, Lynn Boylan.
Thank you so much.